People often ask me how much it costs to own a floating home. And what they mean by that is a variety of things, including how much the monthly fee is, what the monthly fee is, whether you have to pay two monthly fees, do you pay slip rent and an HOA fee, or do you pay just one? Are there other fees that lurk behind the scenes? So this is what this video is about. I'm John McPherson. I deal in floating homes in Portland every day of the week. Give me a call anytime at the number on the screen, and I'll get right into it. You pay only one fee. It's either slip rent or you pay an HOA fee. You pay an HOA fee if you are a co-owner of the whole marina where the floating homes are. All the homeowners are a co-owner of the marina, which we call a moorage in this area for the most part. If the marina has primarily or exclusively floating homes in it, we call it a floating home moorage. If you are a co-owner of the place, then you pay an HOA fee. There's a homeowners association usually. Sometimes it's not formally documented in a way such as what a condo association would be. Most of the times it is. If you are a co-owner, like I said, you pay an HOA fee. Those tend to be, and when I say tend to be, what I'm going to refer to is sales details from last year, 2025. On average, the average HOA fee was $470. Now, with that being said, HOA fees range from around $300 up to $670 a month last year. Most of them were between $400 and $600. Now, in the case of an HOA fee, that's a fee that the entity, usually an LLC or some other sort of corporation or a non-for-profit corporation, charges its members to cover things such as water, sewer, and garbage service, maintenance of the docks, the pilings, dredging if needed, which is pretty rare for floating home mortgages in the area, but there are some. There are a few floating home mortgages that from time to time need to have the silt and sediment dug out from underneath some of the houses, so there's enough depth between underneath the houses so they don't touch down and they don't touch the bottom of the river. But again, there are only a few floating home mortgages to which that dredging operation usually pertains. There is one, however, and they have pretty high slip rent that needs it so much and so often that they actually bought their own equipment and they dredge about a third of the moorage every year. In any case, the HOA fee covers water, sewer, and garbage service, maintenance of the docks, the pilings, the walkways, the parking lot where applicable, the same for the gates, maintaining the gates, the ramps, everything else. All the systems of the moorage, which include every moorage has its own wastewater treatment pump system. So imagine if you run water inside the kitchen in your sink and the water flows down the drain, it goes into a holding tank. That's your responsibility. It gets pumped out into the sewer system of the moorage, which is pretty short. It just runs the length of the docks. It gets pumped up the ramp, out the pipe into a system. Now, it's either the morage's own septic system, or in the case of two floating home morages out on the Multnomah Channel, they have their own wastewater treatment plants. But otherwise, it gets pumped into a septic system, which the moorage owns, which is another expense. They need to maintain that. Or it gets pumped into the sewer system of the city, which in most cases is the city of Portland. In some morages, it's city of Gresham. And then out on the channel, there's another water service provider. But most of those on the channel have a septic system. So those are the expenses that get covered in the case of there being an HOA fee. All of that same stuff is covered if you rent your slip. Only slip rental rates tend to be higher. Somebody owns the moorage that is not you. You're not a co-owner of the place. You actually rent the slip where your house is and pay a monthly slip rent. Again, you don't pay slip rent and an HOA fee, you just pay one. If you pay slip rent, those rates tend to be between the mid 500s up to around $1,100 a month. Now, there was one sale last year in 2025 where the slip rent paid was $2,060 a month. Now, that's a special circumstance. That house actually occupies a double-sized slip, and also is in a marina primarily full of boats, but it's in a place with a commercial lease where the homeowner is allowed to rent it out super short term, such as on Airbnb, which is very unusual for a floating home. But in the case of slip rental rates last year in 2025 tended to be between $600 and $800 a month. 600 and 1,000 a month, that is. The average was $800 a month. And they range, like I said, from the low 500s actually up to around $1,100 a month. That was the most typical range, excluding that one that was 2,000 something, and a couple that are down in the 400s. But in any case, you pay either a slip rental rate or an HOA fee, not both. Give me a call if you have any other questions about floating homes. I deal in floating homes 7 days a week, 51 weeks a year, 1 week a year. I'm usually out of town with my phone off, which is pretty glorious. But for now, make it ring. Give me a call, 503-406-1776. I'm John. I'll answer. We'll talk. Give me a call anytime. This is another question that comes up very often when I talk with potential buyers of floating homes and people who are curious about floating homes, what it's all about, where they are, how much they cost, why the prices seem so random when they look online, and that involves various things that I've covered in other videos. You can call me anytime, though, directly with questions you have. I'm John, 503-406-1776. Today, I'm going to cover just briefly insurance for floating homes. Now, floating home insurance is not an insurance that you would buy, like, say, you would buy a regular insurance for a house on land. I mean, it's insurance, nevertheless, but you can't go to State Farm or Farmers. Those are insurance companies that have agents that work only for, say, Farmers or State Farm. You can buy it through a broker, but only certain brokers are appointed to be able to sell insurance of any given company. The appointment is the thing that allows them to sell the insurance to you. So if you have any questions about who to contact, call me. I know a few brokers who are good at what they do. There's one in particular who has always struck me as being the most knowledgeable. So give me a call, 503-406-1776, and I can put you in touch with a few different people. The choice is always yours who you go through. But floating home insurance is offered usually depending on the circumstances at the time and what companies in particular are in the market offering floating home insurance at the time. It's offered by only a few companies at any given time. You can buy that insurance through a broker. You have to go through a broker. You can't just call the insurance company directly and buy the insurance. Another question that people ask is how much floating home insurance is. It really varies depending on the current value of the house, and if the slip is owned, well, what part of the total value is the slip? They'll consider that. They consider the condition of the house to some extent, the rating of the float, how close it is inside a moorage to uh, a standpipe. So a pipe where the fire department could hook up a hose and turn it on and get water. So there's some things that are considered. But generally speaking, for a floating home, for most floating homes that sell, say between $300,000 and $800,000, floating home insurance is going to be probably somewhere between about $4,500 and $2,500. Sometimes it'll be a little less, sometimes a little more, but that's generally it. I know that is quite a bit more than what it would be for a house on land, a decent amount more, not tons. One thing that one of the insurance companies covers, though, is another question people ask leads into this is there a separate type of flood insurance you need to get? One of the companies offers coverage for floods, the other one doesn't. Assume what I just said is wrong, though. So when you talk with that insurance agent, ask the insurance agent. They are the expert in insurance. I'm just passing along what I've been told and what I was told when I had a floating home policy. And I looked into a couple of different companies. I made a choice based on picking the one that included flood insurance in it. And I also posed a question of my insurance broker at the time. Well, what if one of these people who usually is out on their boat once every 3 years and they're going too fast and they're throwing off a wake, and let's say they're into their second or third six pack, it's Memorial Day weekend or whatever it is, and they're not used to being out in their boat and they're not paying attention. They're, let's say they're drunk, they run into my house. Is that covered? And at the time, the answer was yes. So it definitely, insurance for floating homes covers things that it wouldn't cover for a house on land. If you were to buy a house on land in a flood zone, you would have to have a separate flood insurance policy, and those can get pretty spendy. I've seen quotes go up to and over $500 a month just for flood insurance, depending on circumstances on land. So floating home insurance is a little bit more. It also covers a little bit more typically. I'm John. Give me a call anytime. My number is 503-406-1776. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have about floating homes. Call me. I'll answer. We'll talk. Give me a call anytime. Another thing that people ask me from time to time, and in particular, last week, somebody asked me about it, is taxes for floating homes. Whether you pay a tax, is it similar to, say, a property tax for a house on land? What the rate is? What is it? What's the mill rate? Somebody asked me one time. That's the rate per $1,000. And what I'll do is I'll cover some of that in this video to give you an idea of what to expect and how it compares to tax rates on land for single family houses in Portland is what I'll refer to, and how that's done. But in general, so last week the question was one that I had not been asked before, but what it was is, do you pay a particular tax specifically because it's a floating house? Is there some special floating home tax? And there isn't a special floating home tax per se because it's on the water, was the question. But you do pay a tax rate that's not a real property tax rate for real estate. It's a personal property tax rate. It's not dissimilar in comparison with the prices of the houses to what you might expect to pay for a single family house on land in, say, Beaverton, or depending on the neighborhood, Portland. So it's not dissimilar to that. But just as is the case for tax rates for single family houses in Portland and other areas, including Beaverton, Hillsborough, etc., especially in Portland, it seems to be a mystery as to how the tax rate is calculated. I don't have insight into exactly how it's calculated, but what I can tell you is what I observed from last year's sales information, and that is for 2025. The tax rates ranged from 0.3% to about 2.7% of what was the sales price. Now, they don't calculate, the tax authority doesn't calculate the taxes that you're going to pay based on the sales price times some percentage. What they'll do, as they do for houses on land, is they'll have an assessed value. I'll get to that in a second. That's an interesting one. They'll have an assessed value. They'll have a rate that they apply to that assessed value to come up with the tax rate that you pay every year. And so I'm fighting back a little bit of laughter over that, because just the numbers themselves. So you pay last year based on the sales price, that is, in comparison with the sales prices of last year. The range was between 0.3% and 2.7% of the sales price is what the annual tax rate was. So the average was 1.1, and I'll go a little bit lighter on the numbers here in a second and get to the assessed value. And what I want to point out is there was a house, and it's not because it was in some particular neighborhood in Portland. This is not a tax rate that gets assessed as it does for single family homes in Portland, which is very interesting. I'll cover that right now, actually, just briefly. I looked to try to determine whether there's some way to explain why tax rates are higher in certain areas, such as, say, in Northwest Portland, than in others, say in Southeast Portland. And when I got into the explanation on the website of the city of Portland, I discovered that even within a given named neighborhood, and if you know anything about Portland, Portland is, I'll say, infamous for having so many named neighborhoods. It's pretty impressive. In any case, even within a neighborhood, even within a certain subdivision, you could have a house that's basically the same as some other house, roughly, has the same value, and the taxes paid will be significantly different than the other house. So it's really tough to say what, based on what the current value is, what the tax rate is that you would pay for a single family house on land in Portland. Now, in the case of floating homes, last year, I'll point out a couple of numbers. The highest sales price last year was $855,000. Their tax rate that was paid per year was $7,100. Again, the tax rate is not applied. There's not some tax rate that's applied to the sales price. If there's a higher sales price, that doesn't automatically impact the taxes you're going to pay. But just to point that out, again, $855,000 was the sales price. The annual tax rate at the time was $7,100. There is a house that sold at $475,000. So significantly lower, almost $400,000 lower. The tax rate paid for that house, $12,600 a year. So if you are the sort of person who wants to know what their monthly expenses are going to be, I can give you a general idea of what they might be based on the price range you're looking in, if you were to buy a house in that price range. But with that being said, they vary, and they vary quite a bit, tax rates, that is. So this is one of a series of a couple of videos about what the monthly expenses are. Primarily, it's you pay slip renter and HOA fee, taxes, of course, what kind of tax that is. And then also I have one on insurance. Give me a call anytime. I'm John. My number is 503-406-1776. You'll call me, I'll answer, we'll talk, I'll answer your questions. Give me a call anytime.